Tell me if you can relate to this. You just spent 6 hours prepping, you've mapped out the entire political landscape of the local candle makers guild, and you've scripted the perfect dramatic opening scene. You've got maps, custom character art, a flowchart for the whole adventure, and then your players spend the entire session causing complete mayhem in the local bathhouse. Yes, completely made up story, never happened to me. You've all been there, that deep sinking feeling when the beautiful intricate story you built all week gets completely ignored by the players, and it's frustrating. But what if I told you the problem isn't your players? And the problem isn't you either. The problem is how you're prepping. What if there was a way to prep less, feel more prepared, and run a game that feels truly alive, no matter what your players do? A way to get your time back, and more importantly, get your joy for the game back. Well, there is, and it all comes down to a simple but powerful shift in how you think. I want you to stop prepping plots, and I want you to start prepping secrets. So, without further ado, let's get into the 5 tips. Tip 1 is to prep secrets, not plots. Obviously, I've said this 3 times now. Instead of a sequence of events, I want you to write a list, top 10 secrets they can discover. 1 juicy sentence each. Like free-floating bits of knowledge that you reveal whenever it makes sense. So let's say your villain is a necromancer raising an army. Here's the kind of thing I mean. For example, number 1 could be the dead are crawling out of the ground at the Old Mill Cemetery. Or Malkor, the necromancer, is hunting down the Crown of Whispers. That would be another secret. Or maybe his power comes from a pact with a shadow demon. Also, the town's gravedigger is being paid to look the other way, right? That could be interesting. Another one would be there's a secret lair beneath the abandoned chapel. And finally, the crown can only be destroyed by dragon's fire. So, now you've got 10 puzzle pieces. They find them by talking, reading a journal, spotting a carving, having a dream. Whatever they choose to do, you reward that, and you let them piece it together themselves. This is the key part. You're just providing the individual bits of information, and the players will do with that what they do best. Come up with crazy ideas. Okay, so the second tip is you start each session with a strong start. How you open sets the energy for the entire session. So I want you to ditch the "you're all in a tavern, what do you do?" There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but it doesn't really drive you into the story. I want you to start in media res. Start with the middle of the action. The adventure finds them, not the other way around. For example, alarm bells ringing across the city as they wake. I'd certainly be awake for that. Or another one, an ambush on the road. Goblins demanding a ridiculous toll. I mean, I wouldn't want to pay that. Another one, maybe a bleeding shopkeeper bursts in, begging for help. The whole point is to grab their attention, hand them a problem to solve. Now, if prepping secrets instead of plots is already making you feel a little bit lighter, I would like you to consider subscribing. I make these videos every week to help you run better games with way less stress. So if that's the kind of thing you're into, I would love if you hit that subscribe button. Anyways, let's go back. So tip number 3 is to keep your NPCs to 1 line each. You do not need a 3-page backstory for everyone. 1 line is usually enough. A motivation and a piece of info they hold, if that's your style. You don't need to give them information. For example, Ilara, the worried blacksmith, wants to protect her family, and she knows that the gravedigger's been acting a little bit shady lately. Or a local sergeant, the lazy guard, wants a quiet life, but he knows the mayor's holding secret late-night meetings. That's enough to bring them to life and improvise a conversation that feels real. And if, for example, the guard doesn't have that information, you could switch it just over to someone else. Now, tip 4 is steal a free map. Don't make one yourself. Yes, I know. I made a whole thing about making maps yourself, and I made a whole tool about it so you can make maps on your iPad. But here's the thing. If you don't have the time for it, your time is too valuable to be spending it on that. The internet is literally overflowing with free battle maps for any type of location. So I just want you to find one that fits, then make it yours with 3 quick features. So for example, for an abandoned chapel, grimy stained glass, saints weeping tears of blood, and maybe there's a cold draft coming from a crack in the stone floor to let them know that there might be something underneath. Flavor and things to investigate without losing an hour on a floor plan, right? And you can describe these, you don't need to put them on the map. And my tip number 5 is to use a proven framework, like for example, the Lazy DM. This is a very well-known framework in the D&D community. If you haven't heard of it, it's a book by Sly Flourish. We'll put a link in the description as well. And I highly recommend reading it. A lot of the stuff that I do that makes this less stress prep possible is inspired by this because it is really powerful. Now he takes us to a whole nother level, but I'm sharing the tips in here that really worked for me and that really made it possible for me to run games while having a full-time job. Now, these tips aren't random. They're part of a philosophy of flexible prep. In the book, Sly Flourish outlines 8 steps with about 30 minutes of prep. And I'll do a whole video on that system, especially because he's coming out with a new book I learned yesterday. But the core lesson is you want to build a simple, repeatable process for yourself to not get lost in the details of the adventure. This is sort of like a checklist that points your prep at what is flexible, useful, and tied to the characters. So that's sort of the big shift. I don't want you to plan linearly like you would write with a novel, but I want you to build sort of like a framework where you can drag and drop things from here and there and put it in your story where it makes sense. And you'll feel more prepared because you didn't pour all your energy into one fragile path that was always going to break. The goal isn't to be the perfect DM with every answer, it's to be a prepared one, ready to improvise. This gives you permission to not know everything, and this leads to less time stressing about prep, more time enjoying the unpredictable, magical stories you make together. So give it a shot for your next session and then come back and tell me in the comments how it went. I'd really love to know. So thank you for watching. Now go play some D&D. See ya.